Have you ever wondered about the hows of actually finding a place to paint plein air? Hey there, I'm Mary Gilkerson, and a couple of weeks ago, almost 10 days ago actually, I asked my email list to send me any questions they had that I was looking for some ideas for doing some of these videos. And I got a lot of great questions. This one comes from Carol Slabinski. So, Carol, thank you very much for the question today. It's a great one. So, her question is all around painting plein air, and that she's actually got several of them. But the hows is the how to find places is the first one we're going to dive into. So, she says, what continues to befuddle me is the hows of finding places to paint on plein air. What do? Do you go and ring doorbells and ask if you can paint someone's view from their property? Do you need permission to paint in public parks? What if you want to paint on a roadside? What are the legalities and safety concerns? What about private roads and private drives and private communities, even if not gated? Can a thoroughfare actually be private, or is that just a put-off? I'm running into a lot of that here on the coast of Connecticut when I travel down to it, and it's very frustrating. There are even discouraging signs at public boat launches that say they are for launching and fishing only. Totally get what you're talking about there. We have some of those same issues here. So let's dive into these first, and she's got a couple of other good questions too. So that first one is about how do you go about finding places? And how do you know where it's okay to paint and where it's not okay to paint? Some of that's governed by municipalities, and there are places that don't want you painting. There are towns and municipalities who've passed laws that actually categorize plein air painters in the same way as they do buskers. You know, people who are playing an instrument with an open hat in front of them. So they've categorized plein air painting as a kind of busking. And part of that has to do with people kind of abusing it and selling straight off their easel without a business license. So they've kind of mucked it up for everybody else. And sometimes it's just a municipality not understanding what plein air painters do. So step one is to check what the local laws are to make sure that you're not opening your easel up in an area where they don't allow you to paint. Luckily, where I am, there aren't those municipal concerns. So you're safe. So that's the first thing I would do is check the local laws. Then as far as private property goes, like if you spot a gorgeous place that you want to paint, but it's behind somebody's fence, it's on their private property. Yeah, I would, if you're just really driven to it, I would think about ringing a doorbell or writing a note and sending them a letter. You know, if you see a place that looks great, scout it out and write down the address and write the person a note. I'm a little concerned about just ringing a doorbell because we're in crazy times and you just don't know how people are going to react to a stranger appearing at their front door and ringing a bell. So I would literally write them a note and see if they respond. Give them your phone number. Give them a little bit of background about who you are and why you're legitimate and not a wackadoodle. So mainly when you're trying to get on private property, you're trying to reassure the owner that you're not a wackadoodle and that you're not planning to sue them if you trip over your own 2 feet. So you may have to give them a liability release so that you're not holding them liable for anything that happens to you while they're on their property. That's going to be most property owners' concern is that, well, what if they trip over my rake? Am I going to get sued? So cover yourself there. Usually, if I'm going to paint on private property, it's somebody I know or I find somebody who knows them. That makes it a whole lot easier. Her next question is, do you need permission to paint in public parks? Again, that depends on the municipality. In most public parks, no, you don't. Because you're not, as long as you're not busking and selling it off of your easel, you're pretty good to go. You can paint in most state parks and all national parks that I know of. So I've never had any questions asked when I've been in national parks painting. And I think state parks are pretty much the same way. So you just want to make sure. Double check if it's a city park that they allow painters. Make sure they don't consider it busking. Then you're going to be okay there. What about if you want to paint on a roadside? Well, I've done that many times. And I've never run into any trouble there. But what you want to make sure that you do if you're painting on the roadside is that you are far away from that edge of the road. More so because you're likely, if it's a small road, to get hit by a car if you're too close to the edge of the highway. You know, people's eyes follow what they're looking at. And if you're on the edge of a small country highway and you're too close to the edge, people's eyes are looking at you. They're going to steer the car that direction. So get way off of the highway. I would get at least 6 feet off of the highway. When you do that, one concern, certainly here in the Southeast, when you're in the edge of the highway, especially in the summertime, that's where ticks like to hang out. And be very, very careful doing that. You need to have on boots and have your jeans stuffed into your boots and your socks pulled up over the jeans so that those little those little nasty critters can't climb into your shoes. So one of the problems with being on the edge of a country road is the flora and fauna. You want to watch out for ticks. You want to watch out for fire ants, and you want to watch out for snakes. Snakes are a real issue, especially in the Southeast. So be careful on the edge of the highway. I think that has some inherent dangers, but if you are scouting it out, again, ahead of time, you should be okay. You should be fine. So private roads and private drives and private communities are just that, even if they're not gated. If the road says private, you cannot go in there. Legally, you're trespassing if you go in there. So don't go into a private gated community or a road that says private. Now, one of my favorite places to paint here in Savannah is actually on Tybee Island. And it's a park that is owned by the city of jointly by the city of Tybee and the national park that's there, the wildlife refuge that's right there. And it's Fort Pulaski. That land is not private, it's public. But the developer that's just beyond has put the private road sign further out to try to discourage people from coming in. If you know that it's public, you can still go in there, and people do. I paint in there all the time. But you want to watch out and just scout it out. But no, you cannot go onto private property without getting in trouble. So if it's a gated community, again, you're going to have to ask permission. They may have a neighborhood association that you can ask or write to get permission to do that. A thoroughfare can be private if it's going into private developments. So a lot of developments in the last 40 years, it was not really a thing before that. A lot of the developments in the last 40 years are private, which means that once you come to the entrance to the development, even if it looks like a fairly large road, you're going onto private property. And yes, it can be private. So again, permission is important. We're in interesting times. You don't want to be there by yourself and trespassing. That could go downhill really fast. So I'd be real careful about that. Then she says, I'm running into a lot of that here on the coast of Connecticut. I think that's true on a lot of coasts. It's true in New Jersey and New York. Beaches are private, and so you can't just go walk on the beach unless you have a public access. Here in the Southeast, in Georgia and South Carolina, the state owns the beach to the high tide line. So the public always has access to the beach. So they can't shut you off of it, but they can in other states. Again, knowing what the state's laws are about that is a big help. Then on boat launches, public boat launches, yeah, there's one where I love, right next to where I love to paint. And I think one of the reasons, I don't think they're specifically gearing it to try to keep painters off. Plein air painting is definitely enjoyed a surge in the last 10 years, but there haven't been enough of us for them to plan around that. I think what they're trying to do is keep gawkers off so that there's room enough for the people who want to fish and boat, and they can get in and out. I know the one that is here on Lazaretto Creek, where I like to paint, I go out there and take photographs because I can walk out and take a photograph and walk back up, and I'm not getting into a boater's way. But that pier is not big enough to really hold me and my easel and to have a boater launching their boat and really moving around. So I think it's mainly a logistics issue rather than anything else. They want to have room enough for the boaters and the fishermen. Remember that they are usually the ones who are paying the fees, and that's why that pier was built. So that's kind of the reasoning behind it. If it's controlled by a national park, you can always ask permission at the national park office, because if it's controlled by the national park system, there is usually a ranger station. And if you ask, 99.99% of the time, they'll let you have permission to go paint on the boat pier, the public landing. I know that when I had students, we did a painting retreat up in the mountains last year and went to a national heritage site that was run by the national parks. And we had, my assistant Stephanie had contacted them ahead of time. So they knew we were coming, and they were very open to us being there painting. It was not an issue at all, but we had checked ahead of time. So I think that's the real key. Ask permission. I know some people like to go ahead and do it and ask permission later. I don't advise doing that. I don't think that's a real safe thing to do. Now, some of the questions that you didn't ask about plein air painting that I want to throw in there as far as safety goes, and I know there's some people watching right now who also paint plein air. They can pipe in as well, but always carry bear spray. I don't always go with someone else. I have a friend I plein air paint with fairly frequently here, but I'm not always with somebody else. And if you've got bear spray with you, it's good for the bears that walk on two legs and have a voice as well. So having bear spray with you is a good protection when you're out by yourself. You have to think about things like that. So if I'm going by myself, I don't go to, remote places that I'm not super familiar with. I do go to remote places at times, but I make sure somebody knows that I'm going in. The only really potentially dangerous experience I've had painting plein air in the wild was when I was doing it. Had my sketchbook with me, not the full gear, but it was midwinter. It's actually January. It was really, really cold, late January. And I was in the Congaree National Park. So I was going into the swamp and walking down a trail and stopped for a minute and then heard snuffling. And about 25 feet away, maybe 30 feet away, upwind from me, was a big feral pig, basically a wild boar. And I could hear as it rooted around for acorns at the foot of an oak tree. well, it was so busy eating, it didn't notice me, and I just backed up slowly and deliberately. And then once I was far enough back, took off, headed back to the ranger station. You do have to be aware of wild animals, but that is the only time in decades of going into the swamp that I've run into a pig, and the only time in decades of painting outside that I've run directly into a critter. So there's actually a little more to that story, but that's the main thread of it. I have seen alligators here when I've been out plein air painting, and there's one that is in the National Wildlife Refuge here, the old rice fields, that will growl if you get too close. So I'm always checking to make sure there are no alligators around before I set my easel up, because the only place to paint really once you're in there is on the levees, on the old levees above and around the rice fields. So you got to be really careful. So just be aware of your surroundings, because when you're out in nature, nature is really in charge. You're going into the animals' environment. It's not the city. So those were great questions. And I think there were a couple of others that Carol had around what she particularly wants to paint. She wants to paint the water. And she said she has a sailboat. She wants to be a marine painter. She has a good-sized sailboat, but the water doesn't stop moving. And so trying to paint on board, she says, hasn't worked too well. You know, some of the great painters of the 19th and 20th, early 20th century actually did paint in the boats. They threw down the anchor. And yes, the water will keep moving, just like the clouds keep moving and the sun keeps moving. But if you can get good at capturing the value pattern, you can capture it in a sketch and then paint towards the light that you're working towards. That's the real key in painting plein air. Don't try to chase the light. Don't try to chase the light on the water, in the sky, or anywhere else. You want to catch it, so you have to kind of get out in front of it. You've got to draw it and paint it enough that you know what it's going to do. Spend a lot of time observing. So you can go out in the boat and take photographs to begin with so that you get really familiar with the patterns of the light on the water. But yeah, it can be difficult until you get very, very quick there. So it can be done. It's been done. I'm trying to think. I may have to post this into the comments later if I can think of I've got an artist on the tip of my tongue who did that. I can think of him, I can think of the paintings, and it's just going whoosh out of my head right now. But those were great questions. I love those. So let me see if anybody in the chat roll has any questions about this. Leslie says she encountered a very pissed off bull once. Yeah. Moving slowly and deliberately is always a good idea when you encounter wild animals or tame animals that are a little upset, because it's when you turn tail and run that they will chase after you. And a little bit of side trivia, alligators can run really fast in a straight line, but they cannot zigzag. Zig and zag, and they can't catch you. Diane Hasty says that had to have been really swamping it. Yeah, it was. I was swamping it. That's why I got caught. Yeah, Leslie says, yeah, you have to get permission. Had a buddy get shot at for going uninvited on private property. That's exactly what I'm talking about. People in the country, quite rightly, are really nervous about people just walking onto their property. If you're living on 40 acres down a long dirt road and suddenly somebody you don't know starts driving up that drive, it's a little nerve-wracking. So you're much better off writing a note first than just driving up a drive. Be really, really careful. And don't just set up to paint on somebody else's property. That's a recipe for an awful experience. Ooh, Leslie says she's had that experience with ticks. Yeah, me too. Ask me why I know about ticks on the side of the road. Yeah, Mary went that way one time. And ticks just love the tall grasses, the unmown tall grass on the side of a country road. And then they get all up your leg and they crawl all kind of places. Ick. Leslie, oh, this is a good solution. Leslie Miller has a great solution if somebody wants to buy while you're out plein air painting. Hand them a card. That gets you off of that busker idea and moves them towards buying from your website or buying from you directly. But be careful. Don't sell off of your easel. It's a really bad idea. And let's see if there are any other big ones there. I see a bunch of people on here who've painted plein air. So let's see. Yeah, Paul Jenkins says he had a hawk fly directly at him too close to the nest. Yeah, that'll absolutely happen. And you know, some of the smallest birds are some of the most obnoxious. If you get too close to a mockingbird's nest, you're going to be attacked and it'll dive bomb you. It can be really actually quite dangerous. Ha, Steed is laughing at my alligator comment. One of the first things she was taught while visiting friends in the back country of Natchez, Mississippi. Yeah, alligators can't turn fast. That's a big ship to turn. So if they start chasing you, you alternate directions and you can get away. Brian Ross says, I struggle selecting a subject or composition. Any tips on honing down to a subject or forcing yourself to stop? I force myself to stop and select. One of the things I do is look for patterns, strong patterns of light and dark. So I was out scouting a spot this morning and actually downtown in one of the squares. And I walked the whole square, first from the outer perimeter and then inside. And what I was looking for was a strong pattern of light and dark so that I could get a really good value pattern going. And I didn't want to be painting directly into the sun. So it's the same basic rules as taking a good photograph. You want the sun to be over your shoulder or behind you. You don't want to be going right into the light. If you're having a hard time narrowing it down, then take something, cut out a little square or rectangle from an index card and hold that up so that you're blocking out all of the other stuff that's out there. It can be a visual overload, but if you block it all out, then it's easier to begin to narrow down on a composition. And then just the regular rules of composition. Keep the focal point out of the center is a general rule. It's a guideline, not necessarily a rule. Look for a strong value pattern. Don't put the horizon line smack in the center. All of those things will help. And Jessica says, why is selling off the easel a bad idea? Because in most cities, you're selling without a business license. Unless you've got a business license. If you have a business license, you're good. You're golden. But if you're selling off your easel without a business license, you are basically considered a busker, and that's illegal in most cities. Buskers have to have a license too. So some cities accommodate that by having special licenses for buskers. Some cities allow busking, but most don't. So you want to be super careful doing that. That's why. So selling off the easel violates anti-busking laws. Steed says, I just had my Jeep windows shot out driving on a local public road. Ooh, that's dangerous. Yeah. If sometimes that's just a bullet that's gone astray. You know, people shoot into the woods going, oh, the trees are going to stop the bullet. Not necessarily, because if the road is just on the other side of the woods, it can still go through the trees. So be careful. Jessica says, also during my recent experiment trying plein air, it seemed a good idea to mix colors in advance. If you don't have the chance to go to the spot a previous day, how do you anticipate the colors to pre-mix? I don't pre-mix my colors until I get there. So the way that I plein air paint is I get there, and unless I've been to that same spot the day before, I get there and I pick my composition and I do a thumbnail and then I do the no-tan. And then I mix the colors. So the reason I do the thumbnail first is so I've caught the value pattern before the light changes. And the color will stay pretty much the same, but the value pattern will shift. So then I mix the colors, and I mix 3 values of each color and 1 color for each of those big mass shapes. If I'm going back to the same place the next day, then I've already got the same color generally, and I'll do it then. But no, don't mix your color ahead before you go out, because you don't know what colors you're going to see. The colors are going to change depending on the light. So I don't mix them off-site. I mix them there. It's busker, Sandra. It's B-U-S-K-E-R. B-U-S-K-E-R. And it's when people are performing on street corners for money. That's a busker. And the law pretty much considers plein air painters selling off their easels to be buskers. That's why you got to be super careful. So those were great questions, Carol. Thank you so much for sending those in. And that's all for today. I'll be hopping on again tomorrow and probably in the morning, but I will post make a post to let y'all know when I'll be going live. I'm shooting for some time like around 10 or 10:30, but I don't have a definite time yet. So watch my page. If you are signed up to get notices, you'll get a notice when I'm going live. So strongly recommend that you, if you want to know when the next one's going to be, that you make sure you sign up on Facebook to be notified when I go live. Take care, everyone. Happy painting. Have a good rest of the week. You're welcome, Paul. I'm glad that was helpful.